Americans love using their credit cards, the most secure and hassle-free way to pay. But D.C. politicians want to change that with the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. This bill lets corporate megastores pick how your credit card is processed, allowing them to use untested payment networks that jeopardize your data security and rewards. Corporate megastores will make more money, and you pay the price. Tell Congress to guard your card, because Americans lose when politicians choose. Learn more at guardyourcard.com.
Betting on sports can be hard, but hiring Morgan & Morgan is easy. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury firm. They have over 100 offices nationwide and more than 1,000 lawyers. Their fee is free until they win. Find out more information at forthepeople.com/bestbets or dial pound law, that is pound 529 from your cell phone, and that is FOR, thepeople.com/bestbets. This is a paid advertisement. Hey, warm brother low, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We're going to have a fairly simple podcast today because we do not have any games on the college basketball betting board for this Thursday. Frankly, we don't have any for Friday as well, so we'll look back at the games that we did see on Christmas Day, and then we'll talk with one of our good friends, Rob Donaldson. And before you ask, I did not do this interview with him on Christmas. I did this a few days in advance, so you're hearing this after the games for Monday were wrapping up. I just want to make sure that nobody works on Christmas. That is the philosophy on this podcast. I'm more than happy to come on, give you guys a little bit of entertainment, try to be able to find you guys some winners. I don't want to make anyone else work, so this was a interview that I did with Rob a few days ago. We're going to be chatting with him just on how he's taken a look at this season thus far, the difference between these teams that are going to be playing one last non-conference game versus these teams that are going to be jumping right into conference play as well. So we'll be taking a look at the dynamics of that, some of the teams that he's feeling bullish and bearish on as well. So going to be a great chat there. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GDIT_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Did not get in any Twitter/X questions. And hopefully you all had a great Christmas. Hopefully you were all able to spend it with some family. If you were working, well, I salute you because I'll be working for you guys all throughout this week, as I'll be back on VSiN all throughout the week. I apparently am going to be doing New Year's Eve as well, so I'll be the Mariano Rivera of the network. Wouldn't have it any other way. I love being able to do that, so we've got ourselves a lot of fun there. And let's take a look back at everything that we did see on the college basketball slate for Christmas. Try to find some trends and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
For Loyola Chicago, things have been less than savory for them as they had a double-figure lead against Murray State. If you, like me, had Loyola Chicago, this was rough. 71-68. Murray State able to get the job done in this one as for Murray State, they go 7-17 from three-point range. For Loyola Chicago, they actually shot 62.5% from the floor. 18 turnovers was a bugaboo for them, though, as they've been dealing with some backward injuries. Miles Rubin, 16 points, only 2 rebounds, though, in this game. For Murray State, they lose the rebound battle 22-21, but they won the turnover battle, and they were able to shoot it well from three-point range, with your main guys being Kyron Lindsay and Terrence Hercom, both being able to supply 16 points, and for Loyola Chicago, 3-9 against the spread as far this season. That's not tremendous. A team has been pretty tremendous to the over, though. That would actually be Charlotte. They played another over on Christmas Day. Charleston, they get the job done, but they do not get the cover. This by a count of 84-81. If you like me at Charleston, they were up at 1 point in this game by 21 points and up by 16 points with 6 minutes and change remaining. So that was a little bit less than great as well. But Ante Brizovic, he was pretty great. He supplied the team with 32 points. Problem for Charleston was they lost the turnover battle by a count of 9-5, as they did win that rebound battle 40-34. But you had 23 big points in this one from Jayshawn Thomas. For Charlotte, Charlotte, so they were able to pick up a cover there. Your best against the spread team in all of college basketball entering into Christmas, by the way, was Oregon State, and prior to them not being able to cover against Oakland a few days ago, they were actually undefeated against the spread. They've now dropped back-to-back games against the spread. Nebraska, they are the champions of the Diamond Head Classic, 78-66 final in this one. As for Oregon State, they go 9 of 24 from three-point range, but Nebraska, they go 8 of 20 from three-point range, and they won the battle on the glass, 31-24 for Michael Rota. Not necessarily as great as showing in this tournament. He had just 6 points for Oregon State, their main man, and Bryce Williams, the main man of Nebraska, he showed up 25 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, and then the true home game for Hawaii. This goes to overtime, so the Oakland Grizzlies, who have been one of the better teams the under thus far this season, they do get an over, but Hawaii in the end, they do win, but on the opening number, they were able to cover. A lot of places open this between 2.5 and 3. A lot of places close this more in that neighborhood of 4, so it depended upon when you got in on this one. 73-70, Hawaii does get the job done outright on the money line, and it was Gaitis Nemska who was able to lead the way for Hawaii. He supplied the team with 25 points, a career high for him. For both of these teams, they were incredibly cold from three-point range. As for Oakland, they go 9 of 29 from three-point range. For Hawaii, 5 of 22 from three-point range, but Hawaii was able to win the battle on the glass by a count of 44-34, as Nemeska was able to give you 11 rebounds, Tanner Christensen 11 boards as well, and for Oakland, now 5 overs to 7 unders thus far this season, and if this game doesn't go to overtime, they're an even better under team. So a lot of intrigue there on Hawaii, now 7-4 to the over thus far this season as well. And if you're taking a look at trend-wise, what we're seeing in college basketball over the past week, we really haven't had a whole heck of a lot of college basketball in our lives, but we have been seeing things be quite overwhelming. 101 overs to 84 unders, so 54.5% hit rate to the over. Underdogs have been having themselves a nice year, and they've been having themselves the last 7 days. That has been rock solid as well. 96, 91, and 2 against the spread. Meanwhile, if you're looking overall for the season, underdogs hitting at a little bit over 51%. 1,021, 977, and 29 against the spread, with the overs hitting at just under 51%, right around about 50.7. 1,012 overs, 985 under. So that's what we saw on Christmas Day, and that's what we're getting trend-wise in college basketball. And coming up next, we're going to chat with our good friend Rob Donaldson on what we've seen thus far this season in college basketball, what he's looking for moving forward, and some of the teams that are impressing him. That's up next right here on Cusco Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Decent Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Cusco Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Decent Family Podcast. Always great to have this band aboard, as we've got Rob Donaldson on. He does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. I know that he, much like myself, very much chomping at the bit to get a few more games in our lives, as this is truly like the slowest week in all of college basketball. But Rob doing a great job of staying prepared, staying up on everything that we are going to be seeing, because January and February, it is going to be a behemoth, and Rob is ready for it. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at RobDFB altogether. And Rob, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Greg. And I think you nailed my thoughts on this week. And honestly, we've been kind of dealing with it for 2 weeks in a row, right? Where everybody's either taking tests or the campuses are kind of away for the holiday season, and now we're actually in the week of the holiday season, and it just feels like it's a ghost town out here. We got the Diamond Head Classic, and that's about it.
Yep, absolutely. And we saw that take place. And always a lot of fun out there in Hawaii. Apparently, they want to change it to not be on Christmas. And I wholeheartedly disagree, because it's a tradition unlike any other. And schmucks like myself need a way to keep themselves entertained. But that said, just in terms of this week, how important is it, for lack of a better term, to stay engaged? Because obviously, everyone should be taking time to spend some time with loved ones, family, what have you. But as we both know, this is a college basketball season that ratchets up very, very quickly. And a few days after the holidays are done, we're getting those 100 million billion game Saturdays. And quite frankly, that's something that I think is very important to be keeping in mind with these teams that we want to be backing and fading as well. Them trying to be able to stay in line, and them trying to stay ready.
I think what I love about college basketball more than a lot of the other sports is there's such a human element at play, right? I mean, you do have the kind of cliche, these are student athletes, they're going to classes, maybe some of them aren't really going to classes, but some of them are, and when you're mixing in the Ivy League into these scenarios, and you have a bunch of like MEAC teams or SWAC teams, they're not thinking about, the next level. They're thinking about how do they better their lives? And part of that bettering of their lives is, partaking in the holidays, maybe partaking in their studies. And when it's finals week, it's holiday season, there's a lot of distractions going on, and a lot of times that really does display on the court as well.
Yep, it certainly is important to be keeping note of that. And how much do you like / for lack of a better term, not like some of these teams that they do have like one or two of these games that are going to be happening very straightly? Like Baylor is playing against a non-D1 team. I think that happens on the 26th, might be the 27th, but we have some of these random fuddy-duddy games that are happening this week. And honestly, I think that keeps a team a little bit more engaged and just keeps them with their eyes on the prize, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw it on Monday with Middle Tennessee State and Tennessee, right? I mean, one team was just looking forward to the holiday, and the other team said, this is our best game of the entire year. We want to actually go out there and win this game. Middle Tennessee State won the first half against undefeated number 1 ranked Tennessee before Tennessee then decided, you know what, maybe we should wake up for at least 10 minutes to put these guys away. And to your point, when you got Baylor coming up this weekend against a non-power team, and I'm looking at the schedule, Louisville, Maryland, even St. Joseph's is playing a Delaware State team. There's going to be a number of different matchups next week, and in particular on Saturday, where these guys are coming off break. They're really not trying to get fully ingrained again. It doesn't really feel like the season is ramped up and they're playing a game every 2 or 3 days. This is going to be after a long layoff. And in terms of the emotional side of things too, I'm going to be 100% looking at a lot of these big point totals, and I might even get a little bit daring and bet some of these first half money lines.
And it is going to be such an interesting dynamic the next few days. As Rob Donaldson, he does great work with the show / podcast, Rob's Best Bets, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And it's in that we're going to be having in the next few days a lot of conference games. And then you have what you just mentioned with the SEC, like one more non-conference game. How do you take a look at the dynamic between the two? Because when it comes to like the Mountain West, they're going to be starting up conference play right away. The Big Ten has already started up conference play. Let's call it what it is. But when it comes to these teams in terms of playing conference games versus non-conference games, I think that it's just a whole different ball of wax as to how to handicap those the next few days.
Oh, 100%. And I feel like, you've been around sports all of your life. I've been around sports my entire life. And there are just some teams that you want to play up against, whether it's, your best friend is on the other side, or it's a familiar opponent that maybe knocked you out of the state playoffs the previous year. And when you get into conference games, you have those familiar faces. You have those familiar coaches. You have these familiar programs that you just want to best and beat up on. But when you have these little one-off kind of non-conference games against a major inferior opponent, it's not like it's UConn going up against Memphis or a big-time clash of brands. I do feel like there's some lackadaisicalness in there, and once you get into conference play, that's where you see a lot of competitive fire, and you see these fan bases really come alive for the games as well.
Yep, absolutely. I think that is going to be so fun to be taking a look at. And when it comes to what we've been seeing in college basketball over the last few weeks, it's been very clear that the SEC has been the top conference in all of college basketball, but they are one of the few conferences in which they're going to be playing a lot of these non-conference games over the next few days. How do you gauge their sort of just level of play these next few days? Because I know that you were talking about taking a look at a lot of these underdogs. Do you think that's almost a little bit of a detriment that they're having their conference play starting up later than, say, the Big Ten, the ACC, and so many other conferences?
I don't know if there's a definitive angle that you can take to say it's good or it's bad. I do feel like this late in the season to kind of be playing stale basketball does get you a little bit of a late start to, that ramp up period. But kudos to the SEC. Unlike the Big Ten, they did go out and kind of had like a challenge this year where the ACC Big Ten Challenge kind of got disbanded. The Big East Big Ten Challenge is no longer there too. I feel like with that dynamic of the SEC of already playing, some of these major games, and heck, even Alabama traveling up to North Dakota was an oddball as well. Mm-hmm. I do feel like they've done themselves a major service to, build up that net ranking because they performed well out of conference against other power conference teams. And when you're also looking at the makeup of how these teams are already flowing and what we know about them, we do have some substance to look at rather than, some of these other conferences that are just kind of getting in the mix of it.
Yep, it is going to be fun to be taking a look at those games and just the dynamic that we're going to be getting in general from all these teams. As Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show / podcast, Rob's Best Bets, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I do think that it's been really interesting what we've seen thus far in college basketball this college basketball season. And how much do you take a look at perhaps things being tiered this year? Because I do take a look at Auburn as a top team in all all of college basketball. Tennessee certainly right there as well. There are a few other teams that you're able to throw out and you're able to say that they're some of the tops in all of college basketball. Kansas, even though they've lost a few games, Houston, even though they've lost a few games, I still think that they're going to be there when it's all said and done. But it does feel like the divide between those top teams and, say, team number 50, team number 60, it does feel very, very large. But the difference between those top teams, other than I would say Auburn, feels very minute.
And what's really cool, I think this is a benefit of the transfer portal, is, for the longest time, we have seen these coaches that have wanted to establish identity, try to build through just the high school ranks, and maybe have a little bit of continuity left from last year's team to really shape and form what that team looks like. But now you've got the transfer portal, you've got the high school recruiting still, and you have that continuity all working together. And now you're really seeing some of these coaches have an established look at what they've been always trying to build because, hey, they could reach out in the portal, grab who they wanted. They could reach out in the high school ranks, grab who they want, and then convince the other guys that were pretty good last year to stay. I think that's what's happening with an Auburn team. I think that's what's happening with Tennessee and adding Chaz Lanier and keeping a lot of guys in-house. I think kind of the best example of this is Florida. You look at Florida and their guards and their size and just their balance across both sides of the ball. Man, I am in love with the makeup of this team just from, the paper standpoint, the eye test, whatever you want to call it. I feel like there's a lot of complete looking teams in college basketball this season, and absolutely, I think transfer portal and team building has something to do with it.
Yep, I think so as well. And I think that it is so important to take a look at these teams that have really been prioritizing things on the defensive side of things as well, because we look at a team like Tennessee. Yes, they have Chaz Lanier. Yes, they've got guys who are able to bomb it from three, but they still entered in that game against Middle Tennessee, the number one team in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I think that that's going to become more and more important as the season goes along, as these games do slow down. There's a little bit more significance behind every possession, and I think that that does bode in the case of the conference play as well in terms of going on the road a little bit more to these defensive teams, because as we know, sometimes your jump shot doesn't fall, but it's much harder to be in a funk on defense rather than offense, in my opinion.
And I think a lot more teams are going to be balanced with their approach rather than, even look at Auburn, I think is a great example, right? Where in years past, they have been live or die by shooting the 3-point ball, and hopefully they can score 90. If they can't, they probably are going to lose that game. And now it just kind of feels like they can beat you in a number of different ways. We saw that against Iowa State and Maui, right? Where they were going up against a great defensive team. They looked really shaky in the first half, but they ramped up that defense in the second half. They had the scoring back up to kind of go along with it. And I feel like there's a lot of teams this year that just have different ways to kill you. There's not a Virginia this year that's just relying on defense. And in past years, like in Iowa, that's very electric on offense. I don't feel like there's that kind of team. Maybe Alabama's kind of that team this year, but, we've seen Alabama already falter a little bit in non-conference play and, just kind of on some of these weird travel spots. So I do feel like that's going to be very, very prevalent, especially, again, once you break into conference tournament play or conference play and you have these opponents that kind of know who you are.
Yep, absolutely. I think that is going to be so key to be diving in on, and there's so many great angles on that front. As joining me on the show, we do have Rob Donaldson, who does amazing work over at Rob's Best Bets. He's joining me on Cuss Cuss Hoops, and with regards to what we've been seeing this far this season, it just feels like things have been sort of, shall we say, herky-jerky with some of these teams as well. Some of these teams have gotten hot, some of these teams have gotten cold, and what are some of the attributes that you're looking for some of these teams that maybe faltered towards the beginning part of the season, but have the chance to be able to make a little bit of a, shall we say, run and a charge when it comes to conference play?
If they do have some roster turnover, I'm going to look at UConn, for example. That was a team in the early going that I really wanted to fade, and, maybe I'm still kind of in that boat, but I'm less so because the guard play, and they're winning in different ways than they have in the past few years when they had, Adama Sanogo or Donovan Clingan. They're finding different ways to win with their guard play now, and that's a testament to great coaching. That's a testament to talented players figuring out as the season goes on, and 100% that's something you got to be wary of. And, even like Georgetown and a Marquette, they've had some stumbles in the early going, but they are starting to kind of play better basketball as of late, and I think there's going to be a number of teams that kind of follow that route as well. You look at the Big Ten, there wasn't a lot of hype around this Big Ten conference coming into the year. But now you look at, the top 10 of the Big Ten, and you can find a lot of impressive teams. I mean, heck, Illinois is in the mix now. Purdue is still there around. Wisconsin, Nebraska, UCLA, Michigan State, Penn State, Maryland, Oregon. These were teams that we kind of felt like were just sort of a mosh pit of these average teams with no real stellar, basketball teams in the mix. Well, now I kind of feel like there's a few different top 15 teams in the Big Ten, and there's a number of different stories in multiple conferences that I think are going to develop as the season goes on here.
Yep, I agree with you on that, and I do think that it's going to be a lot of fun to see what is going to be developing as the season goes along, as well as we do have Rob Donaldson, who does such great work with Rob's Best Bets. He is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Rob, when it comes to taking a look at these teams that they did invest heavily in the transfer portal, these teams that they did have a lot of moving pieces, is now the time that you want to be backing them, and or vice versa? Some of these teams that maybe returned a lot of different guys, maybe they peaked a little bit too early, and perhaps it is one of those cases where the teams that return a lot of experience, they're out in front of the others so much more towards the beginning part of the season, but they taper off a little bit, much like we saw with a team like Wisconsin a few years ago.
You raise a really great point, because one of the teams that I've been in love with in the early going has been UC Irvine. Now, in recent games, they've looked a little bit shaky, even when they, pulled off, I can't remember the exact team, it was this past week that they pulled off a nice comeback from behind victory.
Belmont.
But they didn't look like they were that, yes, Belmont, on the road at Belmont. They didn't deserve to win that game. They should have been losers of 3 straight games after a ridiculously hot start. And to your point, a lot of continuity with that UC Irvine team. And even when you look at some of these teams like a Washington that basically inherited Utah State, or, Wazoo that inherited EW, I feel like there are some of these teams that maybe got a really nice hot start out of the gate because everybody knew each other, but now that transfer portal talent that other teams accumulated and were trying to gel with is now coming to the surface, and I feel like it could be very, very prevalent.
Yep, I feel like it could be as well, and I think that it's going to be a lot of fun to be gauging that throughout the entirety of conference play and just in general. We've been talking about sort of the types of teams that were a little bit bullish/bearish on. I know that you just raised a good point about UC Irvine. Is there a team that you have not mentioned yet that you're feeling either better about right now than you did a few weeks ago, or vice versa? Maybe you were in on them towards the beginning part of the season, but now you're starting to sour on them just a tinge.
I'll go to the reverse first, where a team that I thought, oh, here we go again, and now I'm thinking, maybe this could be special. I'm looking at Georgetown. The more I look at that team and even their losses this season, at West Virginia, in particular, I felt like they played pretty darn good in that game. They were actually leading in the second half of that game upon rewatch. I didn't have eyes on it initially, and Georgetown and just what they've kind of accumulated in terms of talent has always seemed to fall flat the past, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And now it kind of feels like they're a formidable bunch, and that's one of those things too, where initially maybe those guys were trying to gel and they didn't play their best basketball out of the gate. But now I feel like they are. I feel like it's really rising to the top. So that's definitely a team that, I'm definitely bullish on. In terms of a team that maybe I'm a little bit sour on, there's a number of different ways that I could go with this one. But unfortunately, I've kind of got to go with Louisville. The big reason why I got to go with Louisville and Pat Kelsey is just because of the injury bug. They've added a lot of transfer portal guys, and a lot of those guys were trying to gel early on. And it felt like they were, but then injuries kind of struck, and now they're not playing really cohesive basketball, and they do feel like a team that might be carrying a little bit too much hype heading into conference play. So that's one team I am a little bit more sour on than when I started the season at.
Yep, absolutely, and fully understand why, because when you lose a player like Keyshawn Pryor, who was able to do so much in the post for them, that certainly is a little bit of an issue. But something we have no issues with whatsoever is getting you to give us great insights, because I know that you, Rob, are hard at work taking a look at everything that we're going to be getting this college basketball season. You're a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this sport, and I know that even though it is the holidays, you've been working very hard to be able to find those edges here in the latter part of December into January to be able to get us some winners. So let the good people at home know what's on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, we've got a long season ahead of us, and this is just kind of a blip week in the radar, but Merry Christmas to all you guys. And for those who are wanting to follow my bets, throughout the season, just on Twitter /X at RobDFB, and also on my YouTube, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. And as always, Greg, thank you for having me on, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, happy holidays to you, Rob. Rob does such a great job taking a look at this great sport that we all know and love of college basketball, and every single time he joins me, lends such great insights. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And well, we have no games today, so it's a little bit of a shorter podcast, but if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @JDED_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm with you guys all 366 days this year, regular season, off season, games or not. We'll be on this podcast every single day, so I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. And then when we get back to it on Saturday, picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So happy holidays, Merry Christmas to you all, and I'll be back with you tomorrow. Thank you.
Americans love using their credit cards, the most secure and hassle-free way to pay. But D.C. politicians want to change that with the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. This bill lets corporate megastores pick how your credit card is processed, allowing them to use untested payment networks that jeopardize your data security and rewards. Corporate megastores will make more money, and you pay the price. Tell Congress to guard your card, because Americans lose when politicians choose. Learn more at guardyourcard.com.